At this point, I assume we all know how these types of lists work. The only real rule I have is that I'm only picking movies and series that I am watching for the first time this year. If you like this video and enjoy my commentary, then please subscribe down below, or possibly leave a like on the video if you want to see what I'm working on next. I started off July by watching Good Burger with my girlfriend. Yes, I really don't know how you explain this movie to someone who has never seen it. I had no actual problems with it, and I enjoyed myself for the most part after I mentally blocked out the fact that Rob Schneider is one of the major side characters. I don't know what else to say aside from that, so I'll just say that I enjoyed the movie, and I'll probably only ever watch this with another person. 7 out of 10. Like the other Marvel Disney Plus shows, I started watching Loki the day it aired and came back every week to keep up, and I stand by my statement that these shows just keep getting better. The show did a great job at keeping me invested every episode and always gave us a new mystery to follow after the last one is solved. I love the main characters here and the chemistry between all of them. Owen Wilson and Tom Hiddleston are just absolutely amazing, and I love that Mr. McQueen is in the MCU now. Of course, I won't spoil anything here, but holy fucking shit, that ending has me super excited for the future of the MCU, and I'm actually looking forward to Ant-Man 3 somehow. Here's hoping for a bright future for the coming years of Marvel. 9 out of 10. My girlfriend and I made a spinny wheel of movies we enjoyed that the other had never seen before, and the first movie that we got to watch was The Last Unicorn, and I really enjoyed it. This film and the original novel it's based off are great examples of a good dark fantasy story. Despite the main character being a unicorn and this movie being made from members of Rankin Bass, this is definitely not a movie directed at a younger audience. I love the themes of immortality and legacy that this movie wore on its sleeve, and the voice cast was great as well. Not much for me to say, unfortunately, but I very much did enjoy this movie. 8 out of 10. Not long after the both of us binged the entire second season of Beastars in a single sitting, and we both loved it. I was on the edge of my seat the entire season, and it did a great job of wrapping up the one big mystery left over from season 1, while also setting up what we're gonna be seeing in season 3. The characters were just as amazing here as season 1, and almost every main character from the first season had even more character development here. Unfortunately, the one exception to that is Haru, who is barely here in this season and is more used as an inspiration for Legoshi. I do hope we get to see a bit more of her in the future, but I do love the amazing amount of legwork this season did for the other characters, and I won't dock any points for it. 9 out of 10. I also watched all of Transformers Kingdom in one sitting, although sadly I had to take a few breaks during this extremely short series, and I was significantly less impressed, as I was afraid I would be. I can't really pick which season I think is actually the best, and I do think this season in particular made me realize some of the biggest flaws this series has. The voice actors were just not trying to come across as the original characters, and nowhere was this more obvious than Megatron. One of the greatest and most beloved villains in Transformers history had a completely unrecognizable voice and was reduced to a Decepticon Megatron bootlicker. Gunn was the genius planner and manipulator from the original series, and he was replaced with a character who has almost nothing past his intimidating size and beast mode. I can't put my finger on it, but even the design of his face just felt off. I won't go on for any longer about this. I already tried to make an entire video on Kingdom, and I just lost inspiration because of how disappointed I was in this series. Maybe I'll talk about it more if anyone would like me to, but unless someone actually wants to hear my opinions on this series, I'll just slap it with a 5 out of 10 and move on with my life. After that, I watched Space Jam: A New Legacy and was somehow less disappointed in this than I was with Kingdom. This is probably exactly what you would expect from a sequel to Space Jam, although, to me personally, it's not 100% a dumpster fire. I definitely understand all the people who do hate this. I thought the movie had its humorous moments and the message was very much obvious to anyone, but I mean, that's okay. I had fun more than I didn't, but this is Space Jam. It's not a masterpiece, and not a single person thought it would be or wanted it to be. 6 out of 10. Ever since it was announced, I've been eagerly awaiting Marvel's What If, and while I don't know if it really lived up to the hype I had for it in my head, the series still managed to catch me off guard, and I enjoyed it from start to finish. I won't spoil anything, but I did not expect them to hint at a season 2 at the end of this, so it was a pleasant surprise. I always love these kinds of alternate reality stories, and I did enjoy the animation style for the most part, but the voice acting was a pretty mixed bag here, and I'm not even talking about the actors that didn't voice their own characters, because I didn't even notice all that much. Not much else for me to say here. 7 out of 10. But a movie that very much did live up to my hype was James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. This movie still managed to blow my expectations out of the water. All of the jokes landed, and I loved all the characters and their chemistry together. All of the actors were just amazing, and I love the way this movie movie embraced the ridiculous side of comics, and the fact that characters like Polka Dot Man and Starro are in the movie are perfect evidence of how. Sadly, despite how much I did love this movie, there's not really a lot for me to say about it here, aside that I just loved every second of it. 9 out of 10. After that, I watched Hulu's Sasquatch, simply out of intrigue, and I actually really enjoyed it. Despite the title, this isn't a documentary series about hunting Bigfoot, but actually a true crime series about an experience an undercover journalist had in the early 90s about a murder claimed to be carried out by a Bigfoot, only to get sucked into an extremely deep and complicated rabbit hole that only gets bigger with the more answers he gets. Anyone going into this not specifically looking for a documentary about Bigfoot will probably enjoy this, at least I know I did. I did get some amusement seeing the reviews for those that were super salty and petty about the fact that this show wasn't exactly what they wanted it to be, but I can also kind of understand the irritation. So here's your warning now, I guess. This is a series for fans of true crime and rabbit holes, not looking for people solely for a Bigfoot documentary. I give it an 8 out of 10. I didn't get the chance to go to the theater as much as I wanted to this year, but luckily I did get back to see Shang-Chi and I enjoyed myself through this entire movie. The fight scenes here are arguably the best they have ever been in the MCU, and the way they set up the 10 rings is super well done, and I'm excited to see what they do with this character in the future. And then there's Wenwu, aka the Mandarin, and I think it's safe to say that the wait to finally get the real Mandarin on the big screen was worth it. The way they completely rework his backstory to fit this narrative is perfect, and I won't spoil it here, but I love the way they did him justice at being a great and intimidating antagonist in this movie. I would easily throw Wenwu in with Thanos and Killmonger as one of the best villains in the entire MCU. My only real complaint here is that there's so many highs in this film due to the creative leaps the creators clearly had that it's blatantly obvious which parts of the film were meddled with by the studio higher-ups. I hope that in the future of the MCU, Disney and the studio bigwigs can stand down more and let these writers and directors have the creative freedom they need to truly make some of these films masterpieces in the genre. Despite my gripes about the studio interference, this movie is a huge step in the right direction, and I'm still giving it a 9 out of 10. Now, a Disney project that I was very much impressed with was Star Wars Visions. I always love seeing a series with an integrated formula try something new. Star Wars in particular is a series that I think needs to try to be more creative with its story and characters in the future of the franchise. An anthology series that spans the entire galaxy and has little to no limitations on how it's allowed to handle its story is just a genius idea, and I'm glad this concept is finally being allowed to grow. Not every single piece of Star Wars media should solely exist to expand on the existing world we already know. I love seeing the story and this universe expand and unfold as much as anyone else. It's arguably what the Bad Batch series did best, but allowing the scope of what these creators are allowed to do limitless allows these smaller stories to thrive and show us the potential this franchise could have going into the next decade. And I haven't even touched on the gorgeous animation in every single episode of this series, and the spectacle of seeing Japanese creators give their own takes and cultural inspiration to the Star Wars universe. I hope that Disney and Lucasfilm keep trying new and creative things with Star Wars in the future, and I'm excited to see what they do next. 9 out of 10. After that, I finally got around to watching Godzilla Singular Point, and this was certainly different. The monsters themselves in this I enjoyed for the most part. Seeing all of the monsters aside from Godzilla himself portrayed as species rather than a singular being was an interesting take, and the designs were pretty unique and looked well as CG models interacting with 2D environments. Godzilla himself doesn't actually appear until the halfway point of the series, and while I don't have a huge problem with the show's slow pace, it can definitely get irritating at a point. The series is only 13 episodes long, so it's very noticeable that Godzilla takes until episode 6 to make an actual appearance. The other major change from any other take in the franchise is the monsters being trans-dimensional beings that are seemingly from another timeline. The series has multiple extended conversations surrounding other timelines and the crossing of time streams and singular points, and eventually I just couldn't care to pay attention to it anymore. I probably enjoyed it more than I didn't, but I can't decide if I actually liked the series or not. It's definitely an improvement on the last Netflix Godzilla anime, but it also doesn't take a lot for you to be able to do that. 6 out of 10. After that, I watched an anime that I've been anticipating for much longer, Violet Evergarden the movie. I fell in love with the original series, and it made me cry on several occasions, and unsurprisingly, the movie managed to steal some tears from me as well. The animation in this movie is unsurprisingly beautiful, and the story is both full of heart and hurt. I have nothing negative to say here. This movie is a perfect finale to the series that answers the burning question we have left over from the original series, that also wraps up all the stories and character arcs and gives us a great sense of closure to this beautiful anime series. I don't want to spoil anything here, so I'm just gonna give this movie a 10 out of 10 and move along to something I was anticipating far less and was even less impressed with. I skipped seeing Black Widow in theaters to wait until it was on Disney Plus, and I think that was the right move because this movie was just fine. It's no Captain Marvel or Thor: The Dark World, but it's certainly not one of my top MCU movies. My biggest gripe with this movie are the villains, but even improving this movie would still have problems. The biggest positive here is definitely Yelena, but part of me is really irritated that that's basically the entire point of this movie's existence. Taskmaster is blatantly wasted in this movie, and even if the fight scenes are pretty good, I really hope that we get a proper Taskmaster later in another MCU project because there's so much more potential they can do with this character. The Overseer of the Red Room was intimidating in his intellect, and thinking ahead made him a genuine threat, but aside from that, he almost has nothing to his character, aside from his controlling attitude towards women, and even that just feels forced. Aside from that, I enjoy the chemistry between most of the characters, and I do hope that if they return, we get more work with them to see them in action even more. I guess I'm not mad that this movie got made, but I'm also on the side of the argument that this movie probably should have come out 5 years ago. 6 out of 10. My girlfriend and I decided to binge Squid Game to see what the hype was about, and this definitely caught me off guard. I went into this assuming that all the hype was building the show up to be greater than it actually was, but now I see this is actually one of the most weirdly genius series I've watched in a while. I fell in love with all of the main characters in the first few episodes, and all of the tiny, minute details sprinkled throughout were just amazing to see after looking back at the series a second time. I don't really know what else to say about the show other than if you're thinking about checking it out, I'd say it's worth it. Looking forward to a season 2. 9 out of 10. After that, I binged the 5th season of Big Mouth in a single sitting, and I really don't understand how this series still has new things to say while simultaneously managing to actually stay good. The show is still full of its hilarious and crude jokes while still telling a relatable story about growing up and finding yourself while working through your issues. Despite my constantly high expectations, the series always takes me by surprise every year, and I'm still looking forward to season 6. 9 out of 10. Of course, I also had to binge all of Tiger King 2 in a single sitting, and somehow this season is a bit less crazy, but even more intriguing than the original. The amount of things that have happened in not even the last 2 years is just baffling, but despite everything that's happened, the story has yet to have an end. We're still learning new things about these people and their past, as well as meeting new characters and making new discoveries in some unresolved stories from the last season. If a third season is to be made and to give us some kind of closure, I will gladly be here for it, but of course this is all real life, and these are real people, and things are a lot more complicated than they would be in a fictional story. No matter what happens next, there's always gonna be something open-ended or unresolved, but I'm excited to see where the story goes next. 8 out of 10. After putting it off for several months, I finally finished Star Wars The Bad Batch, and I'm very glad that I did. I started watching the series back when the first episode aired, and I can say without a doubt that the show started with a smash hit because the first episode is arguably the best episode of the entire series. Not to sell the series short, of course, very few episodes for me were straight up unenjoyable, but a lot of the first half of the series was just filler. I may not have enjoyed all of the missions for Sid, but Sid herself I grew to enjoy. I grew to love all of the characters in this series, and those that I didn't love I was invested enough in to see where their journeys went next. I think it's safe to say we're definitely gonna get a second season, and I'm gonna actually try keeping up with the series as it airs on Disney+. I did really enjoy this series, but sadly I don't particularly have much else to say about it without delving into spoilers. 8 out of 10. Bored on a December afternoon, I decided to finally watch the new Mortal Kombat, and this was bad. Sub-Zero and Kano are by far the characters they got right the most, and even they had their moments where I couldn't help but just roll my eyes. Cole just sucked for 95% of the time he was on screen, and they could have easily changed the plot ever so slightly to include literally anybody else as the main character. There was no reason for them to create a new character for this movie simply to make him a descendant of Scorpion. The idea of him and his power is pretty interesting, but in execution, they absolutely fudged it. Scorpion himself is barely in the movie, and while he's definitely not the worst character in the movie, he's barely in it enough for me to say whether they were actually good in adapting him from the games. He hates Sub-Zero, and he lives in the Netherrealm. That's basically where the similarities end. Most of the effects are actually pretty good, emphasis on most, and the overall character design and costumes are pretty cool updates of the video game characters, but for everything they got right in this movie, there's several things that they just absolutely get wrong. I don't want to dwell on this film too much and be too negative, so I'm gonna move on and slap this movie with a generous 5 out of 10. After that, my girlfriend and I watched A Quiet Place Part 2 and we both enjoyed it. While I do enjoy the first film more, the sequel still does a great job at building tension and making you question what exactly is going on. Despite showing us a glimpse at the first day of the invasion, there's still a lot of unanswered questions about where these monsters come from and what it is they're doing on Earth in the first place. This film is definitely a setup for a third and final one to end the story, but I hope that they keep the backstory of the monsters out of it. I like the air of mystery we have around them, and I'd rather keep the story set on the characters and what they plan to do next in their journey. I won't spoil anything here, but this is a great middle chapter for this to-be trilogy. 8 out of 10. As quickly as possible, I got my ass to a theater to see Spider-Man No Way Home, and I won't spoil anything here, but this is the most satisfied I have been in a Marvel film in what seems like ages. This film managed to actually exceed my expectations, despite my super high hopes and hype. All of the returning characters are amazing here, with the standout villains by far being Alfred Molina's Doc Ock and Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin, who both just effortlessly slip back into their characters like the original Spider-Man trilogy was made a few years ago. My only real complaint about the film is that most of the first act just felt mediocre at best, and I'm probably being a little harsh there. Despite how much this film looks back at Spider-Man's past, the end of the film definitely makes me hopeful for the future of Spider-Man in the MCU. This is by far the most excited I've been for MCU Spider-Man in a long time. 9 out of 10. Also, this is editing Davey Mun here. I also watched Hawkeye. I completely forgot to write down that I watched Hawkeye, but I did watch it. I'll give it an 8 out of 7. Yeah, no, I'll give it an 8 out of 10. I thought it was pretty good. Thought Hawkeye was pretty good. I fucking love Haley Steinfeld. She was good in this. This video is so fucking behind. I am sorry. Once again, I binged the latest season of Aggretsuko in a single sitting, and this season was certainly different. I won't spoil anything here, but I'm very mixed on how to feel about this season. Some characters made decisions that, while they irritated me and made me want to scream at my screen, it also didn't feel unrealistic or completely out of character for them, at least to an extent. In the end, I still enjoyed this season much more than I didn't, and the future of the series still looks interesting. 8 out of 10. While there were a lot of other films and series I wanted to see this year, I didn't find a lot of time to sit down and watch them, or I wanted to watch them with my girlfriend, so I ended the year by watching Klaus. I missed this film when it came out, and only now got around to finally sitting down to watch it, and I loved it. The animation style that was perfected over the course of several years pays off in spades. This is genuinely one of the most beautiful animated movies I have ever seen. And luckily, this movie is not style over substance. This is an amazing modern reinterpretation of the Santa Claus origin story, and one of the most unique. J.K. Simmons is great as Klaus, but he's actually hardly in the movie, but that doesn't take away from how good all of the other characters are. I don't have a whole lot to say about the film overall, but I loved everything this movie had to offer. 10 out of 10. I definitely got around to watching more in the last 6 months than I have in a while, and I'm glad I did, because I really do enjoy making these lists. I have my hopes for the coming year, and I've heard good things about the films I didn't get around to watching before the end of the year. I plan on watching at least most of the animated films from Disney and Pixar that I missed this year. I started Monsters at work, and Zack Snyder's Justice League, just never got around to finishing them. This year has some upcoming projects I'm excited for as well, such as the 3rd season of Love, Death, and Robots, Lightyear, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, The Batman, Stranger Things 4, and you better believe I'm going to theaters to see Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse Part 1. If you want to hear what I have to say about any of these future releases, then please subscribe and leave a like on this video if you enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.